Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are beginning our coverage of The Circle Season 5 after the first batch of episodes to come out, and so far this season is okay. I feel like it's largely in line with other seasons of The Circle that we've gotten so far, and it's obviously going to be a bit of a mess putting these power rankings together as more players will be coming into the game. But for this ranking, I'll mainly be focusing on the players in the game that we have seen so far, and ranking them based on how lucky I think they are to win the game from this point on. But there are 8 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 8, we have what I guess is the first boot of the season, and here we have Brian, aka Brittney. And Brian was someone who definitely seemed to be more willing to play the game strategically, and we definitely got some good game talk from him, such as him immediately suspecting Bruno being a catfish. However, he was also not very good at convincing people he himself was genuine, as he didn't really open up to a lot of people, and that really made a lot of people suspect that he was a catfish. And he obviously was trying to play someone who was radically different than him, playing someone who is much younger, and through him being unwilling to open up and potentially expose himself as a catfish, that only made people even more suspicious of him, to where people were willing to target him. And obviously, he never really did that well in the ratings. He was sort of towards the back of the pack for a lot of it. 6th place in the first rating, last place in the second rating. And yes, while he does talk to Raven and she seemed willing to save him, really it was a pretty bad position for him to be in, as it was essentially between two catfish, two people that people generally were not very comfortable with. And yes, while Brittney does get taken out over Bruno, I feel like at the end of the day, it really indicates that Brian was never in that strong of a position to begin with. And while I enjoyed watching him on the screen, he didn't really have much of a footing within the game. So because of that, I do have him here at number 8. And with that, there are 7 players in the game to talk about. Now, yes, we know that more people will be coming in, but for this video, I'm just going to be focusing on the players that we know of in the game at the moment. But there are 7 of them left to talk about, and I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game from this point. But at number 7, the player I believe is the least likely to win the game from this point on is Billie Jean, aka Bruno. And yes, the main thing you have to give Billie Jean credit for is that she did build a bond with Chaz, to where Chaz was willing to fight for her over Brittney. However, at the end of the day, Bruno and Brittney were both kind of on the out, and they have similar issues to Brittney in that people generally don't find them to be pretty open. Now, a lot of that does stem from her being a catfish and her not wanting to give away any information that could throw people into believing that she is a catfish. But in doing so, she isn't really building too many bonds that could make people want to fight for her. Now, admittedly, we do see Chaz fight to save her, but again, I feel like Chaz is someone who has many more options moving forward compared to saving Bruno. And yes, while Chaz does fight to save Bruno over Brittney, I feel like that doesn't bode well for Bruno's long-term chances. And on top of that, Bruno doesn't seem to be in any core alliances at the time being, which I do think could come back to bite her down the road. And yes, while it is still early and things could definitely change, especially as more people come into the game, I feel like for the time being, Bruno is in a pretty bad spot. And because of that, I do have her here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and I feel like these next 2 players are relatively close. Now, admittedly, this person at number 6 is liked by more people within the house, but I feel like overall they have less strategic players backing them. But here we have Marvin. Now, it's not as if Marvin doesn't have any strategic backing. I mean, he is in a kind of showmance with Raven, but he also was shown building the bond with Chaz and Raven in order to keep himself off the block. So I do give him some credit for that. And plus, he's been doing relatively okay in the ratings, where he's gotten 4th place in each of the first 2 ratings. And I feel like moving forward, it'll be pretty interesting to see how Marvin does moving forward. And I'll also say that obviously, this is why he was not on BB24, and I do find it pretty interesting to see him now playing here. But if I'm being honest, I feel like Marvin is definitely more poised to be targeted later on in the game compared to this next person we'll be talking about. As yes, while he is in a showmance with Raven, I also feel like a ton of people in the house know about that already, and I feel like if they get the opportunity, they'll try to break up that duo, with Marvin being more likely to be blocked over Raven. So I feel like that alone puts Marvin in a more precarious spot than the next person, which is why I do have him here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have another player that I don't think is winning the game, but I feel like long term they're probably in a better position than Marvin. But here we have Sam, and I feel like Sam is pretty unlikely to actually win the game. Now, yes, they had a pretty big jump in their first 2 ratings, going from last place in the first rating to third place in the second rating. However, we've also seen this type of player play before. This type of player that stumbles early on but is able to rebound in the second rating. We saw this with Yu Ling from season 4. We saw it with Chloe from season 2. We also saw it with Shubi from season 1. But the thing about all these players is that, yes, while they all got to the end, none of them ended up winning, as they were all seen as pretty big threats, which caused a lot of players to tank them in the final rating. And I feel like Sam could have that trajectory over the course of the season where she does eventually become pretty likable. She is someone who is seen as pretty authentic, but by the end game, they're seen as someone who can be dragged along so that they can be tanked in the final rating and be a shield in front of these other players. So I feel like that alone, based on their track record from previous seasons, isn't that great. And even then, I mean, they only went to third place, so it's not as if they became an influencer at it, so take that as you will. Now, the main thing I will give Sam over Marvin is I feel like her bond with Chaz is something that can propel her deeper into the game than Marvin's bond with Raven can, as people more blatantly see Marvin and Raven as a duo, whereas I feel like Sam can parlay her relationship with Chaz to be a more strategic one. So I feel like through that, Sam could get towards the end of the game with Chaz. Now, at the end of the day, I feel like Sam is pretty unlikely to win, but I feel like she has better long-term prospects than Marvin, which is why I do have her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and I feel like these next 2 players are, again, pretty similar to each other, as I don't really know where they truly stand within the game. However, we also got a decent amount of game talk between these two, but at number 4, I did decide to go with Tom. And admittedly, I feel like Tom has been less propped up in the edit so far compared to the next person we'll be talking about. As yes, he is shown building this bond with Jennifer, and they have agreed to get information from the guys and the women respectively. And they do seem to be a pretty under the radar strategic force right now. No one's really looking at them as that big of a threat. However, I also feel like we don't have enough information on where they truly stand in the circle, given that they haven't actually been rated yet. And through that, I mean, we don't really know the bonds that they built with other people. As yes, we have gotten that one game talk with Tom and Jennifer, and they did figure out that Brittney is a catfish. I still feel like we need to learn more about where they stand within the house, and we need to learn more about whether people are willing to work with them moving forward beyond their duo of getting information. Now, if it does turn out that Tom and Jennifer are in a strong position, then I would have Tom quite a bit higher on this list. But for the time being, I still feel like we need more information. But from what we saw so far, it was pretty impressive. And I do have some faith in Tom and Jennifer to do well moving forward. I just feel like we need more information and obviously more rounds of the game to play out. But for now, I did decide to leave Tom here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we have a very interesting case to discuss here. But here we have Brett and Xanthi, also known as Jennifer. And I will say coming into this that I was kind of amused to see Brett come in here, Brett from BB20. And I did love that conversation that they had with Marvin before the first rating, where obviously, I mean, you have the context of Marvin almost being on Big Brother himself, and obviously him probably recognizing Brett from BB20, but then just leaving that out of the edit entirely and trying to present it as a bro down. So I feel like there was some interesting subtext there. But obviously, I was a bit disappointed to see Brett being blocked so early in the game, where it did seem like he was just left out of the initial group. And through that, he was an easy consensus target with a decent amount of people being willing to block him if they were the influencer. So obviously, that's not great. I feel like Xanthi, on the other hand, is someone who played a bit more actively bad, where she did try to come in saying that she was a preschool teacher, but immediately doing stuff to undercut that. And then you have other stuff during the game where she was one of the only people to pick leader instead of team player, and is the only one that says that she would rather be successful than happy. I mean, obviously she's a preschool teacher, so obviously she wasn't trusted and she was blocked thereafter. But I feel like after Brett and Xanthi come into the game as Jennifer, I do think they pick it up to a degree. They obviously build a bond with Tom right at the bat, and they do seem to be the more active team between them and Tom. And we do see more game talk from Brett, where Brett has some pretty good reads, like where he's able to pick up that Bruno and Brittney are probably catfish. And through that, I feel like they're probably going to be a strategic force moving forward. Now, yes, there's still the concern of how well they'll be able to keep it up. And similar to Tom, I feel like we just need more information about where they truly stand in the circle right now. But if I had to guess, based on the edit that they've gotten so far, I feel like Jennifer will be a more prominent figure moving forward compared to Tom. And through that, I do have a bit more confidence in Jennifer to actually win the game. But again, I am still very unsure at this point, which is why I do have them here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and obviously the top 2 are Chaz and Raven, the 2 influencers during these first 2 rounds. It's just a matter of the order at this point. But at number 2, I did decide to go with Raven. And the main reason I went with Raven here is, one, I feel like she's the less strategic between her and Chaz, where I feel like Raven is someone who is more naturally liked, which is the main reason that she has done so well in the ratings so far. Whereas I feel like Chaz has been a bit more active in building bonds and alliances that allow him to have allies that are willing to rate him highly. But even so, I still feel like Raven is poised to do pretty well. I mean, if we are comparing people to previous seasons, I mean, we literally saw Frank last season, who I had very similar issues with, where I feel like Frank wasn't playing overly strategically, but was just so naturally liked that people consistently rated him high in the ratings, and eventually went so far as to rate him high to win the game. So I feel like Raven definitely has that going for her. And I feel like if this is a less strategic cast that is willing to overlook stuff like that, that could allow Raven to skate on by. And as well, I mentioned earlier that her and Marvin are seen as a pretty clear duo at this point, and that could be targeted at some point. I feel like Marvin is more likely to be targeted at this current point compared to Raven. So I feel like that'll definitely buy Raven some security there. And Raven has been relatively propped up in the edit to where she will be a major character across the season. So I feel like there's a lot of things going Raven's way, and I feel like she will be a pretty big power player moving forward. However, compared to Chaz, I feel like she is less active in the strategic game, which does leave her here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win the circle right now is Chaz. I know I just spoiled it. And I feel like Chaz is kind of similar to Raven in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, he did very well in the first 2 ratings, where both of them were influencers. And Chaz also seems to be very well liked in the circle, where he is shown, like, building bonds with people, and in turn, people aren't really that threatened by him, despite him doing very well in the ratings so far. He has also gotten plenty of personal content talking about like how he wants people to open up. Like he gave Bruno that chance to open up about herself, and that is what motivates Chaz to want to save Bruno at the next blocking. So it's not as if Chaz is shown as to be this pure game bot. I mean, he is shown someone who is very personable and someone that is very well liked within the circle. But as I said a moment ago, I feel like between Chaz and Raven, Chaz has been shown to be more active in building bonds in the game. I mean, he is shown building a relationship with Marvin and Raven that culminates in the alliance there. He is the one to build that alliance. He is also shown getting his way in building a bond with Sam when Sam was doing pretty poorly in the ratings. And considering that Sam and Chaz seem to be a pretty significant relationship at this point in the game, really speaks to Chaz's winner chances as well. And I feel like compared to someone like a Tom or a Jennifer, who are shown being also pretty strategic players, I feel like Chaz is someone who is definitely a better mixture of these elements, where I feel like on one extreme you have someone like a Raven who is able to do really well in the game based purely on her likability and her social game, whereas on the other hand, you have people like a Tom and Jennifer who are shown being pretty blatantly strategic. And yes, while that could lead to them having some success down the road, it could also lead to them eventually being targeted. Whereas I feel like Chaz, right now at least, is being shown being this pretty good blend of the two, where he is shown being very well liked and someone who is caring about the more personal aspects of the game, while still being given strategic content and being shown actively getting his way at certain points, like being able to get close to Sam and getting out Brittney, which is set up from pretty early on, and him actively getting his way and saving Bruno over Brittney at that second blocking. So I feel like through that, Chaz definitely has so many elements going for him that make me feel confident about him winning the game. Now again, it is still very early on, and obviously with more players coming to the game, that could definitely change over the course of the season. But I feel like given everything we've seen so far, Chaz is the person I feel the most confident about in winning the game, so because of that, I do have him here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. Now I will be back again next week to update the power rankings again following the second batch of episodes, so stay tuned for that. I also have more general Survivor content moving forward, so stay tuned for that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.